Well, he's like itching for a fix, like he's an addict or something. He's like taking the copper wiring out of the walls to scrape some money together. What is his hang up on this crusade?
Welcome to Unbelievable, the podcast where I tell my good friend Kurt 2 unbelievable stories from history, but here's the catch. One of them's real, one of them's fake.
And I gotta guess which one's which.
I am the skin of the salmon at your fancy French restaurant that you take off, Luis Mejia, joined here by... Oh God! Kurt Danner.
Okay.
We're here, we're back, and we've got another wonderful episode for every folk at home that hopefully will have that reaction of unidentifiable screams.
I'll take unidentified screams. That feels like a good, realistic goal. We'll take unidentified screams as a reaction to our podcast.
Yeah, the only podcast that makes you want to scream and you don't know why. Well, today, Kurt, I have two unbelievable stories for you, and as it is tradition in this podcast to set our audience's gauges correctly in fact finding. Why don't you tell us, Kurt, a quick little fun fact before we get into our two stories, Kurt?
Yes. So you said quick little fun fact. This will be a fun fact, but it's not going to be quick. This is your episode, Luis. I will not take your spotlight after this, but just for a moment here.
Okay.
I want to see if I can short circuit your brain. Okay?
Oh, please.
So, Luis, tell me, true or false? The grandson of Foul-Weather Jack kept a bear as a pet during his time at Trinity College.
Okay, well, this is bringing up a couple of interesting points.
Mm-hmm.
So, Foul-Weather Jack, a character we've talked about before.
Twice.
We've talked about him twice before, and someone owning a pet in Trinity College is something we've also talked about before in this podcast, Kurt. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say no, false. I want you to finally, for once, be lying to me just to make me suffer, but I will not fall into this trap today, Kurt.
So just to clarify, I have in the past told you two made-up stories about Foul-Weather Jack. And one made-up story about a pet bear at Trinity College. Mm-hmm. And your mathematic equation here of 3 lies adds up to a lie. That's you're going to false here?
Yes.
Okay. This fact is true.
I hate this.
So let me repeat it. The grandson of Foul-Weather Jack kept a pet bear at Trinity College. This is like the happiest accident I've ever stumbled into. And this is just an absolute mess. Luis, has your brain short-circuited? Did I do it?
I really don't like... We've been keeping this show very independent. Every episode has been very independent of one another, and we're now building a cinematic universe, if you will. We're building now lore.
The Foul-Weather lineage lore.
Yeah, it only took us 1 year of doing this podcast, but... Let's hear it, Kurt. Let's hear this lore.
Yeah, well, I also think maybe we'd better stick to our episodic style here. So I'd like to say that I'm going to promise not to terrorize you anymore with Foul-Weather Jack, but I really don't think I can hold myself to that. But, okay, let me try to...
And that applies to future times, too.
Yeah.
Not just now.
I'm going to do my best here to put this to rest, okay? So... To recap, I told you a made-up story in which Foul-Weather Jack was a World War I soldier who got really drunk at a party. I told you another made-up story in which Foul-Weather Jack was a pirate-hunting privateer who had a grandson who became the governor of South Carolina and stole a bunch of money or whatever. Also not true. And I told you a made-up story about a man who kept a pet bear at Trinity College in defiance of their pet rules, and then the bear ended up escaping and eating some people. That story also was not true.
Very good.
So, here is the truth finally, okay? Foul-Weather Jack was a British naval officer and explorer during the 1700s. He was named Foul-Weather Jack, you might remember I mentioned this before, because he had a tendency to run into bad weather.
Nice.
Foul-Weather Jack's real name was John Byron, and his grandson was actually Lord Byron, famed British poet. And as you may remember, Luis, Lord Byron actually did, in his time at Trinity College, keep a pet bear.
Oh,
he was a huge animal lover, and they had a no-dog policy. And he said, okay, well, they don't have a no-bear policy, so what will they do if I bring a pet bear? And that little anecdote was some of the inspiration for my Cambridge bear murder mystery story. So, Kurt. it all fits together. It's all been Foul-Weather Jack. It's only ever been Foul-Weather Jack, Luis.
It's only ever been Foul-Weather Jack. You know, I'm glad. Okay, this didn't take too much of a turn as I thought it was going to be. I think this actually puts my mind at rest. Finally, for once, it's nice, and I do like Lord Byron, so this is a good connection. I like this. Thank you, Kurt. You know what? Thank you for this.
Yeah, I had done so much smoke and mirrors, so much misleading, and finally I put all the puzzle pieces together in the right way for you, and now you feel completed. You got Tetris? Got Tetris over there, Luis?
I did got Tetris we've cleared a line.
You got Tetris. All right, tight.
Yeah.
Well, I think, is there a better time than ever than right now to move on to...
Well, Kurt, you mentioned that you're trying to clear away some of the smoke and mirrors, but I'm coming back here with a smoke machine and
a mirror machine.
Yes. So, Kurt, please, if you'll allow me, I'm going to take you, as well as our audience, into a journey back to the medieval times, medieval ages, back to one of the best periods, or I don't know if you want to call it the best periods, one of the periods we mostly, I guess, kind of are familiar with, and that is the Third Crusade. You familiar with the Third Crusade, Kurt?
Yes, that's the one where they, I don't know. I'm familiar with the Crusades, and I know there were 3 of them, and I think the middle one was kind of like, they didn't really do anything. But that's all my knowledge.
I will just tell you this. There were plenty more crusades. Most of them terrible failures. Seriously, none of them good. But both of my stories, which I have for you today, concern with not only that time period, but that place of the world at that time. Now, to start with my first story, Kurt, I'm going to pose a rather controversial theory, okay? So my thesis that I'm going to try to prove to you with this very first story is money is the root of all evil. That's true. We can say that's true, generally. However, sometimes money can also be the root of great social reform, all right?
Okay.
Maybe potentially controversial, but I'm all right with doing this. I'm all right with challenging authority. So, Kurt, I'm going to take you back to the year of 1187.
Good year.
Very good year. And that's because
it rhymes.
At this point...
it also rhymes.
Okay. Well, this year is 1187, and the king of England at this point is King Henry II.
Nice.
King Henry II at this point is facing a really growing conflict with England's lifelong enemy, which we all know, it's France.
Yes.
There's very few times throughout history of the world has England not been in constant troubles with France, and this is one of those cases.
Few things breed hatred like being neighbors for a long time. You know.
or roommates, which, this is kind of the same thing, too. And we've got experience in this, Kurt. But this is quite early on in the conflicts between France and England. One of the main reasons there's conflict is because England at this time is the British Isles as well as part of northern France, or what is now northern France.
Ooh, they got a little continental in there.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of dispute. Because of this, France's king at this point, Philip II Augustus of France, he kind of hates Henry and says, "Hey man,
that's fair.
We want that land back. Please, well, not please. I will kill you if you don't give me that land back." They want land, they want stuff. Classic medieval politics. We love it. In the middle of this conflict, around in 1187, both kings of France and England received notice that the holy city of Jerusalem has fallen to Saladin and his troops as a result of the Second Crusade.
Oh, no.
So Jerusalem is now in the hands of the Islamic Caliphate under Saladin.
Right.
Now, Henry II's son, who is Richard, who would become Richard the Lionheart, or the Crusader king.
Right.
Richard says that he wants to do a crusade. He hears these news and says, "Dad, let me go on a crusade, please.
All the
this
rage
is all
right
I want
now.
to do.
All the cool kids are crusading.
All the cool kids are doing it. Please, Dad, let me do a crusade." To which Henry and Philip II, they both say, "Sure, that would be great. Let's kind of stop our squabbling for now and focus on the crusade." something else, kind of global politics.
Nice.
The crusade is, well, at the end of the day, the crusade is also attacking French and English lands. So they said, okay, let's worry together about what's going on over there, and then we'll figure out what's going on at home here. So what both countries established, mostly England under Henry II, is the now known as the Saladin tithe. They put on the Saladin tithe in order to start raising funds for this crusade, what would become the Third Crusade.
Okay.
And let me just explain to you what the Saladin tithe is.
Yeah.
So this tithe would tax every single person in England and France a tenth of every single revenue and property that you would have. A tenth of all of your revenue would go to the state.
Whoa.
This would exclude books, precious stones, knight armor, clothes, whatever would help the crusade. However, everything else, your property, if you are renting something, all that money or a tenth of it is going to the crown.
Wow.
And it doesn't matter if you're the clergy. It doesn't matter if you're a lay person. It doesn't matter if you're a nobleman or just a serf. A tenth of everything is going to the crown. If you serve in the Crusades, or if you take up the cross to go to the Crusades, you will be excluded from this tax. So there's an incentive to become a Crusader. Every single time that you have to go give this tithe, when the collection happens, there will always be a member of the Knights Templar, a bishop, and a baron present for the collection of this tithe. If you're caught giving less than what they think you owe, they will gather a jury of 6 of your peers that belong to your parish, and under oath will ask them to snitch you out. Basically, they will get 6 of your friends and say, this person's actually not giving what they owe. And if you don't give, you could face excommunication. This is a period of time when religious fervor is in full effect, crusades and not crusades. Excommunication's bad.
Right.
It's bad news bears for everyone,
Right.
so you don't want to be excommunicated. So yeah, sure, you're
But
going to be...
they're not like checking the books. They're just like eyeballing the amount and being like, that feels like not enough.
Basically, if they see you and they think, oh, you're a well-dressed baron and you're trying to give me just $20 and a cigarette, they're going to try to sniff you out, you know? But anyway, that's what the rules of the Saladin tithe happens. And this is...
Can I ask, do you know if there's any, maybe you can do a little, pay part of your tithe directly to them, Because this reminds me of, I have definitely traveled in countries before where the police will pull you over for speeding and they don't have a radar gun. They're just like, well, I looked at you and you were speeding, but you can pay like a little bit of the speeding ticket directly to me, and then this is all settled. This makes me think maybe if they're like, whoa, that's not enough, you'll just have to give us like the extra right now.
Well, maybe. There really aren't records of that happening. I don't doubt it happening because it's been a part of human history for the entirety of our human experience here. But you know what? The point is the same, Kurt. The crown is getting so much money, right, at this point. And then there's so much money that is being taken that this is the most taxation that had ever been imposed by the British government.
Wow.
And this is one of the first cases of revenue taxation, right? So of essentially sales tax.
Right.
Now, there's just one issue, is what Richard the Lionheart says. Richard the Lionheart says, Dad, this is taking too long. I want to go on my crusade. So I am going to go on my crusade. So he joins Philip, the King of France, in waging a war against his dad.
Okay.
He says, Dad, this is taking too long. I just want to go on my crusade. Get out of here, basically. So he betrays Henry II, his dad. And whatever, about a year later, in 1189, Henry II dies. He fully is gone, which means Richard the Lionheart becomes King of England.
Right.
Now that he's king, little boy's going to go on his crusade. Yes or
crusade
yes.
Time.
Finally.
Ooh.
Yeah, it is crusade time and no one can stop him.
In my first 100 days as king, I will go to Israel.
And as such, he starts fast-tracking the collection of the tithe. He says there is not enough. He starts selling land, like land that belongs to him as the Duke of Anjou, as the Duke of different places. He starts selling land in order to raise more funds. He also starts selling other people's lands
What? He's like
saying,
itching for a fix, like he's an addict or something. He's like taking the copper wiring out of the walls to scrape some money together. What is his hang up on this crusade?
And there's a story, or allegedly Richard the Lionheart said the phrase, "I would sell England if I found someone to buy it." Essentially, this man is ready
he knows what he's
pay
about.
everything. He just wants to go on a crusade, man. Come on,
girls just want a crusade.
Girls, Richard, little lion dick wants to go on a crusade. Eventually, the money gets raised to go on the third crusade. In total, between what was taxed from England and France, there was around 100,000 silver marks, which is about 150,000 pounds of silver.
Nice.
That were recollected to fund this crusade. It's a little difficult to get what this number would be represented at this time period. Some scholars estimate that would be equal to around 150 million pounds of today money. However, to give you a better idea of what this would be like, 100,000 silver marks is around 3 times what the treasury made in 1 year. So it's a lot of money.
3 years' salary.
Yeah, they raised 3 times the national GDP of England. Is what they got with the exclusively the Saladin tide. So anyway, yay, crusade, there's money. I finally get to go to the crusade, says Richard. And as I prefaced, Kurt, the crusades were less than successful most of the time.
Right.
After 4 years of crusading, so Richard the Lionheart leaves in 1189. After 4 years of crusading, he naturally fails to capture the promised land.
No, but they tithed so much.
I know. He got so much money back and almost ruined the economy of England, only to just have to return from Jerusalem and the Levant, having made a peace treaty with Saladin. The only things that they got to keep were they only got to keep some coastal lands, like the city of Accra and a couple other coastal places, but they did not retake Jerusalem, and they had to really strike up a deal with Saladin.
Oof. Good thing he didn't sell Britain, I guess.
I guess so. Well,
good thing he didn't quit his day job.
Well, we'll kind of get there because he starts heading back
Britain's been mortgaged.
He calls this peace treaty with Saladin and starts heading back to England. By the way, this man has barely spent time in England because he was born in France and lived the majority of his life in France. He went to England to get crowned king and then left to go to the Crusades.
That's true. Right? He just stopped to pee in London. What was that?
Basically. But, everyone at this point...
Of course he would sell England. He probably didn't even know where it is.
Yeah, he was told, hey, but we're going to have to sell the Bishop of Canterbury to slavery. And he's like, I don't even know where Canterbury is. But everyone starts breathing a sigh of relief because they don't have to pay all this money to go to the war, because they were still paying the Saladin tithe as the Crusades were going on. Okay, so they were having to pay so much money. So everyone was like, okay,
how was this
whatever.
so expensive? Because they had done this before. Did they have to raise all this money in the past as well?
They've had to, but this was a war that was mostly led by the kings of these respective countries. Prior to this, Crusades were mostly led just by private armies or organizations like the Knights Templar. This one was the first time where there was a mix between France, England, and even Austria at the time.
And the taxpayers get stuck with the bill? Who elected these people?
Kurt, I'm afraid that's how most of warfare has happened and will continue to happen throughout history.
What about the little guy, Luis? The tithe payers,
I want to think of the little guy, Kurt. I am the little guy. But at this point, unfortunately, we're all at the expense of Richard the Lionheart. But anyway, it is finally 1192. The crusade is over. Everyone's heading back. Everyone says, yay, no more tithe. Yes. Let's go back to... I don't know, whatever you were doing in 1192 England.
They're like, yes, no more tithe. Well, back to starving.
Essentially, but it's better to be starving with some money and starving with no money.
Yeah, before they were starving and in debt. It's not like the tithing made up for the starving in any way.
Sure. Anyway, he's heading back from the Crusades, and he gets captured by Duke Leopold of Austria.
He's not very good at this.
Not really, but why was he captured? Oh, because he was going to be handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, because Henry VI needed to raise money for war funds for an independent war.
So he was going to be sold for ransom anyway?
Basically, so Richard the Lionheart was captured by the Holy Roman Empire, and now the HRE was asking for ransom to England. And how much did they ask for, Kurt? 100,000 silver marks, if you recall, the same quantity than the Saladin tithes.
That's smart, because they were like, this is the amount of money that this man can get out of Britain. Like, we know he got it before, so he can get this amount again.
Yeah, he can do it again, and look how easy it was for him. So the word gets back to England. And at this point, the person ruling in England is the Queen Mother, so the mother of Richard the Lionheart, known as Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Nice.
And she starts raising money. She says, yeah, let's get the king back. Let's get my son back. So here's round 2. Saladin tithe, round 2.
Electric
sans
Boogaloo.
Saladin. Right? So Saladin is dead at this point. But now they're trying to get the Saladin tithe once more. So they start raising money, same as before. They start taxing everyone, but this time they go directly for the clergy. They said, because before it was something organized mostly by bishops. Now it's directly organized by the state. And they're saying, clergy, including bishops, give me your money also. Also, I'm going to raid the coffers of every single cathedral around. And I'm also going to take advantage of this tax that you had to pay if you wanted to avoid military time. So if you were a serf, you kind of had a duty to go to war if you were asked to do so, but you could pay a tax in order to avoid going to the military. So they forced everyone. They told, hey, you're going to go to a war, you will lose. Pay me money.
I feel like the crown was like, hey, church, remember this thing that you guys used to organize, and last time we organized and paid for it? Yeah, we hated that. Where's the holy purse? Show us the holy wallet.
Show us the holy wallet. And that's what they did. In just 2 years, once again, they raised 100,000 silver marks, and the money was sent back to the Holy Roman Empire. Richard the Lionheart was released. And he was released in really a bad position to be as royalty.
Yeah.
You know, the public kind of hates you after you've been draining literally all their money.
Yeah.
Okay. And all of this because of personal squabbles of a king that just wanted to go on a crusade.
Right.
He just wanted to go to the Holy Land and do something. And now all of England had to pay.
I think they need to flip him and resell him to make up for their debt, you know? They're like, hey, we got Richard the Lionhearted, fresh in, okay? Who wants him? Who's got the silver marks? Break him out.
Yeah.
He's only going up in value. What? Prime of his life. already raised money twice.
Going to the moon, just sell him. Yeah. Just sell Richard the Lionheart.
Exactly. We're going to pump and dump Richard the Lionhearted.
Yes. Well, you know, and luckily the public didn't have much to do with Richard the Lionheart because he came back, and he came back in 1194, 1195. 4 years later, he died. So he really didn't do
money
much
well
after
spent.
that.
Worth every mark.
Well, please. And he died at 42. So he was king for 10 years. And he spent a total of 6 months in England, Kurt.
I was going to jokingly say king for 10 years, and he spent 2 of them in England, but it was less than that.
It was less than that, Kurt. It seriously was a bad look for the royalty. And when he dies in 1199...
He spent, 2 semesters in England? He studied abroad in England.
He studied abroad, and he was probably talking about it the whole time he was in Jerusalem.
He probably hated the food.
He was being... Oh, my God. Hated the weather. Ugh. But... Even and to this day, Richard the Lionheart's buried in France too. So he was more of a French, the French colonies, or what is now France. He lived more there. But after his death, John, his brother John, King John, becomes the king. And this is a bad thing for John because Philip II, who, as you recall, was the king of France, kind of really liked Richard the Lionheart, but he despises John. Seriously, hates John.
Oh, no.
So whatever truce existed before, because they were all going to the Crusades, now that the Crusades are over, now that Richard the Lionheart is over, Philip starts fighting John for the lands in France.
Oh, we're back where we started. That's nice. Kind of
we're back to where we started.
Circle. Return to normalcy, you know?
We're back to fighting with France. So what does King John Dude,
Crusade.
he just follows on his he follows on his older brother's steps because he only knows how to do one thing, and that is raise funds for war, baby. So how do you do this? You tax, you sell land, you sell more land, you need bridges, you don't have work labor, doesn't matter. Force your servants to build bridges.
Whoa.
Do you object? Oh, sorry, do you want to be excommunicated? Or better yet, do you want to be hanged and drawn and quartered? Haha. So that's what King John's reign basically looked like.
Guy's business mogul. He knows how to get maximum productivity.
He saw what his older brother had done with the Saladin tithe and then the ransom money and said, I can do this. However, I can do this with a little more strength and a little bit more carelessness. Classic younger brother stuff. So people were so tired of this. They could only take around 10 years since this happened, that barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215. And what is the Magna Carta? You've probably heard of it. It's one of those documents that we kind of all hear about. The Magna Carta was a piece of legislature that essentially protected the people from kingly power. So if you wanted like basic protections before this, you didn't have it. The king could do anything, like ask for 100,000 silver marks from every single person.
Right.
So one of the main things that this Magna Carta was able to achieve was that tax that was paid in order to avoid military service has now been revoked. Yeah. Also, every city has their own independence of the crown and the special council that has to formed. There's a specific clause in the Magna Carta that says neither town nor man shall be forced to build bridges over rivers, except those who are obliged to do so by custom and right.
They said,
so unless you're a bridge builder, you can't build bridges.
They said, welcome to the bridge building section of the Magna Carta. This is where all your bridge questions will be answered.
Yes, exactly. Now, also, this restricted the amount of taxes that you can take from other people, the goods that you can take. One of the main things that it was asked is that if you're going to be taxed, you need to be told what you're being taxed for. Because back before the Magna Carta, the king just could come to your house and say, hey, I'm asking for 10% of your wages to give to me. And they can ask, what is this money going for? And the king would respond, don't worry about it. And that was fully legal. But yeah, and because of that, of the Magna Carta signing, that's considered one of the, I guess, first constitutions or first drafts of the Constitution. So even the U.S. Constitution is supposedly modeled after the Magna Carta.
Yeah, I knew that. The Bill of Rights, I think, took a lot of inspiration from the Magna Carta because it's seen as like one of the early major legal documents that was guaranteeing rights. Even though I think all in all, it didn't really provide a lot of protection. It was just like the king can't be like a total dick.
Basically.
And people were like, woo!
Hell yeah! Woo! First time anyone has ever said this. 1215, good year for everyone.
Yeah, bare minimum.
Bare minimum, seriously. This is where our story comes to an end, but it's just interesting that such an important document like the Magna Carta was signed, all starting to a single guy saying, please, guys, let me go on a crusade. Please let me go on a crusade, and destroying the country's economy for it. And a quick little fun fact to end this story. Saladin, the caliph of the Islamic region that conquered the Holy Land, his wealth, all the wealth that he acquired from conquering, from being king, was all redistributed to his subjects and to his land, so that by the time of his death, he only had to his name 1 piece of gold and 40 pieces of silver.
Wow.
He didn't even have enough money to have a burial.
He couldn't have even paid for a crusade.
Couldn't even pay for a crusade, but all that money went off to the people, while on the other side, about 3 world governments spent a ridiculous amount of money to not even conquer the Holy Land.
Wow.
Womp womp.
Womp womp. You know, Saladin, I think when he was an older man and had less money, he was lucky that he wasn't in the tithing situation with 3 people eyeing him, because I bet he still had nice clothes, and he shows up 10% of his assets is, one little crumble of silver. Oh, no way they're going to take that from him. No way they're going to let Saladin slide on that one, baby. But what I keep thinking during this story is that it's almost too bad that the kings weren't a little more corrupt or maybe a little stupider.
Yeah.
Because I keep thinking, like, multiple times you had a whole bunch of money in your possession and then you actually went and spent it on the thing you were going to spend it on, which was a bad idea. I feel like a lot of people would have just looked at that money and been like, maybe I'll just be really rich and comfy off this and just keep taxing everyone. Like, had they decided to do that anywhere in the process, they just could have put a stop to it.
Well, even prior to the Magna Carta, Kurt, you have to remember that kings at this point believe that their power is imbued by God.
Right.
Richard the Lionheart even at one point goes off and says, I will not listen to any authority superior to me because my only superior is God. So screw it. If you want to go on a crusade, I will go on a crusade and you can't stop me.
Yeah. It's really amazing too that like he failed in ways that couldn't have even been foreseen,
And it's due to this loss of money that eventually the territories in what is now mainland France that used to belong to England are now gone. This is one of the reasons why.
Yeah. There's even a bunch of
England and the British Empire is just on the islands.
Yeah, there's even a bunch of big ripple effects. But I don't even want to say that this story is a like big domino, little domino situation because it all happened like almost in his lifetime, but really close together. It was completely just he failed so badly at this task that it had negative outcomes that couldn't have even been foreseen.
Horrors beyond one's comprehension.
He was going to go on like a holy liberation war, and he failed so badly that the monarchy had to concede rights for the first time in human history.
That's the only thing he liberated.
Yeah, there was a little bit of liberation. He did a bit of liberation.
For this next story, we are actually going to stay in this general time period. We often bounce from place to place from time to time, but we're actually going to return to the coronation of Richard the Lionheart in 1189. So We're going to return to the beginning of Richard the Lionheart's reign. Now, he, as we've talked about this, Kurt, he barely spent any time in England. The only time he essentially spent in England was when he went to London to be coronated as king. Right. And after that, he soon after left for his crusade. So during this coronation in Westminster, historically, throughout English history, Jewish people and women were the only people not allowed at this coronation.
Okay.
However, at this time, some important barons and even some royal, noble, aristocratic members of English society were Jewish at this point. And as such, they had shown up at Westminster Abbey in order to bring the newly appointed king the royal presents that often the court brings, right? So a lot of these Jewish nobles came by with gifts, even if they were essentially feeling like they were secure and safe because they were men despite being Jewish. But that's beside the point. Richard, at seeing this during his coronation, actually ordered them to be kicked out of Westminster and be flogged for not adhering to kingly rule or to the historical tradition of not allowing anyone out here.
Now, did he still take the gifts? Because I think if he still took the gifts, that's unfair. That's not right.
Probably, Kurt, but let's be frank. At this point, we've already seen the king be way less unfair, so taking the gifts is not that bad. So the Jewish nobles were kicked out and flogged out of Westminster. Because of this generated a rumor around the English populace that the king had ordered 4 Jews to be killed. And as such, riots erupted in the streets of England. Notable Jewish scholars, some aristocracy, some nobles had their houses burned down, businesses burned down. Some of them were even murdered just for being Jewish. This was one of the first instances, or not first instances, but an important instance of, frankly, Jewish genocide.
Yeah.
And some of the persecuted Jewish people managed to escape the islands. Some of them went to a different part of England, some of them fled to Ireland, and some of them fled England completely. Among these noble families, there was a noble Jewish family that lived in Norwich, England.
Okay.
That's Norwich, Norwich,
Nice.
I think.
Like porridge.
And like porridge, but with an N. Now, upon this persecution, the Norwich nobles fled from England, and they took a ship down to Al-Andalus, which, as you might know, Kurt, this was Spain at the time, but Islamic-controlled Spain. They sailed all the way down into the Mediterranean, and they settled on the port city of Almeria, which is on the eastern coast of Spain, kind of southeastern, so close to the Strait of Gibraltar. Almeria is now called Almeria in current-day Spain.
That means yellow.
So
Did you know that, Luis?
It does not. Kurt,
Almeria?
hey,
yeah, that's
good.
yeller. Sorry, continue. I'll be quiet from the peanut gallery over here. Yeah.
Now, Islamic Spain, Kurt, or Al-Andalus as it was known to be incredibly welcoming to other religions. So Muslims, Christians, and Jews all lived in quite good harmony.
Nice.
And this brought about a lot of scholarship, a lot of great new inventions, a lot of trading of information and knowledge. Some of the most notable people of the medieval period were from Al-Andalus, from this Islamic-controlled Spain.
Nice.
Now, here in this period, here in the city of Almeria, this is where we get the first mentions of a young person named Yaqub ibn al-Mariya.
Nice.
Which was also known as Jacob of Norwich. Now, Jacob of Norwich was the son of this noble that was initially kicked out during the Jewish persecution in England. Jacob has also been called sometimes in some documents as Jacob bin Esra. So we can assume that the father of this man was Esra of Norwich or something along the lines, right? Now, little Jacob came of age in Al-Andalus, but in 1192, when news got around that Richard the Lionheart had left the Holy Land, very defeated, tail between his legs, afraid that he wasn't able to conquer anything, they decided to take a ship to the Caliphate of Saladin, where they finally settled in Damascus, the capital city. Esra, so the father of Jacob, being a noble, an English noble, he was quickly able to fall into the ranks of the lower nobility of the court of Saladin. Due to this, he was able to enroll his son Jacob of Norwich, or little Jakey, into one of the best schools of the Caliphate of Saladin. Now, remember earlier, the previous story, when I told you that Saladin gave all his money away before he died.
Yes.
Okay? So he gave all this money to his subjects and to public works within the caliphate. He was known as a very generous sultan, a very generous king. He died late in 1193. Now, if you remember, one of the people that the Norwich family arrived in Damascus in 1192, so 1 year before Saladin died. Mm-hmm. When he died, one of the recipients of that big wealth that he gave off went to both some of the lower nobility and funding for this one school that Jacob was enrolled in Damascus.
Nice.
Now, because of this, not only did Jacob and his family become incredibly wealthy, or just very comfortably wealthy, but Jacob, due to this, also went on to become one of the greatest minds of the Islamic Golden Age.
Nice.
Okay? So Jacob of Norwich, which is a hilarious name if you're thinking that he's literally one of the greatest minds of Islamic Golden Age.
Right.
I guess he would have been called Yaqub ibn al-Mariya, right? But
what if his name was Jake Ridge?
Ridge.
Like he's a snowboarder.
Right. But because of this, he finished his school early in the 1200s, actually around the time when the Magna Carta is being signed.
Nice.
And after he finished that school in Damascus, he traveled to Baghdad in order to study in the Baghdad House of Wisdom.
Right.
Now, the Baghdad House of Wisdom, Kurt, you may know, but for those of you who don't know, could have been comparable to one of the great libraries around the world at this time. You could compare it to the Great Library of Alexandria.
Right.
This was one of the main spots where wisdom and scholars met in the Middle East, in this part of the world at this part of the time. And this, in the Baghdad House of Wisdom, is where we get some of the most incredible technological advancements. For example, things like algebra were developed on there. Astronomy was further investigated in the Baghdad House of Wisdom. So some of the best minds of the Islamic Golden Age passed through here.
Well, not like in the house. They weren't like investigating the astronomy in the House of Wisdom.
They were. It was not only a library, Kurt.
Luis,
but
unless there are stars inside the Baghdad House of Wisdom, they were not doing astronomy in the house.
Kurt, I hate to break your bubble, Kurt, but I'm sure the Baghdad House of Wisdom had a balcony or something. Come on.
I
Kurt.
had not even considered this. Please continue.
It's not just one big dome.
This really is a
Come
cutting
on,
edge
Kurt.
place. Balcony and everything. Holy cow. Holy cow.
But anyway, you know what I mean. It's like saying, Kurt, you just said that there's no way the people at MIT discovered rockets. How are they going to launch the rockets from the cafeteria of MIT?
You said they were studying astronomy in the House of Wisdom.
Okay, Kurt.
That's
All right.
I'm saying.
Whatever. You're dividing threats here that we really shouldn't be. I feel like most of our audience would understand that the Baghdad House of Wisdom is a place of knowledge.
I don't know. Pretty suspicious to me.
But anyway, one of the minds that passed through here was Jacob, or Yaqub, Jakey.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Considering that little Jakey had traveled from England, then to Spain, then to Damascus, then also went all the way to Baghdad, Jacob developed great interest in sailing, also charting not only maps, but also charting the stars in order to facilitate sailing, right? So he was really interested in working to figure that out. One of the most important contributions that he had during his time in the Baghdad House of Wisdom was charting the night sky of the Mediterranean, or the Eastern Mediterranean, throughout all the seasons of the year. Ooh. So prior, people had only known how to travel when the water is nicest, which is probably around like October, maybe early in the year too. But now you had a whole entirety of a charted map of all the seasons, of where the stars were, a star guide. He also developed different theories with astrolabes or astrolabes, not sure how you pronounce them, where it's one of these instruments, kind of like a sextant, that leads you to be able to chart the stars in order to ease sailing. Oh, nice. So he was really interested in astronomy and the sort. Now, he loved to travel. It was in his blood. It was in his journey as an immigrant. He loved to travel, and he had the money to do so, being of lower nobility. And he was basically a Nepo baby, but of science, and he took advantage of that. Now, all of this was great, but his next trip would be his most important. He wanted to continue charting the stars, and he noticed that a lot of the work in the Mediterranean had already been done. There was a lot of scholars in the Mediterranean, so he decided to embark into what is now Kuwait, out into the Gulf of Oman, out into the Arabian Sea. So do some of the same work he did, but now out in the Arabian Sea. Right. There are tales that he would spend 15 days on board, take 2 days in a port to resupply, and then be back on for 15 days. 15 days at this point was a huge amount of time to spend in a ship, especially if you don't have things like canning, which we've learned before was invented much later. Right. But he would just stay in his ship for days to just track the stars, and he carried on doing this for about 3 years in the Arabian Sea. This trip, however, took him to the coast of Karachi, which is now the capital of Pakistan, so on the eastern part of the Arabian Sea. This is where he got to meet with other scholars. Every port he met with other scholars, but it is here in Karachi where he met up with different Chinese sailors, this time of the Song dynasty. He met with Chinese sailors and different polymaths who were also on this similar type of world tour, also different traders. There was a lot of Chinese influence in that part of the world. In order to track his fortune, he met a couple of sailors that said, "Hey, you're a sailor. Let's play a fortune game, and so we can tell you if you're going to survive your next trip." Okay. These Chinese sailors showed him a bowl that had a needle in it that would move around at the same time as you would do. No matter how you move the bowl, the needle would magically stay in place, and this would, I guess, help out in fortune telling. Whatever he noticed that this needle would always point to the south, and what the Chinese sailors were showing him was a rudimentary version of a magnetic compass. Right. which the compass is actually one of the main inventions that the Chinese, one of the main 4 inventions, including gunpowder, paper, the compass, and something else. But the compass was one of the most important things the Chinese had ever invented, but they invented it 400 years earlier. It's just that they would use it as a fortune-telling tool and not really use it for sailing.
Interesting.
Okay. So he immediately brought this knowledge back to the Islamic world. He said this will finally allow sailors to travel without the need of having a clear day in order to look at the stars. You can travel at night, at day, in foggy weather, in overcast days. This won't be an issue anymore. So this way, he's advancing the age of exploration. And this was revolutionary. So around the mid-1200s, around the mid-1200s is when we start getting evidence of the Islamic world using trips and using sailing ships using compasses. And that moved all the way through the Mediterranean until eventually all of Europe started using the compass, the magnetic compass, in the 1200s.
You know, it's funny. Sometimes I'm really envious of, I guess it's a similar feeling to when you discover a new song that you really like, and then you kind of have this feeling of like, I can never hear it again for the first time, you know?
Sure.
I always think like, imagine being there when they discovered the wheel. Like, you would just lose it. You'd be like, we can do so much with this. But that's, I mean, a wheel is such a boring thing. But I'm just thinking about the revolutionary applications of just a thing that will always point in the same direction. It's like something that is so boring, it does not even enter our daily lives most of the time. Even though, you know, our cars are using GPSs, our phones are using GPSs. We're not really thinking about it. But when that happens, they're like, this changes everything. This thing points. Are you kidding me?
And you know what? There were some mentions of a compass being used prior to the discovery that Jacob of Norwich did. However, him being a well-known traveler, well-known scholar, well-known nobleman, he was able to actually push further research onto this, send others on different scientific expeditions. And Jacob of Norwich, eventually decided he would go back to Spain, back to his hometown of Almeria to, well, I guess, further this investigation back with the Islamic world on the other side of the Mediterranean. However, he went on to the Mediterranean and hoped to bring this back to Spain, but was never heard from again. So, although he may have not been heard of again, he died in this trip. His introduction of the compass to the European world would never be understated because, I mean, maybe the compass didn't help him at this point. A compass will tell you where to go, but it won't tell you where the bad weather will be at. So it really didn't help him out in this case. But that's where the story of Jacob of Norwich comes to an end. An English immigrant that became a Spanish immigrant that became a big member of the Baghdad House of Wisdom.
Wow.
And all of because of Jewish persecution in places like England.
All I can say is that it's too bad that the Chinese sailors weren't using like the weather app as a fortune-telling tool, because that could have really, you know, made a big difference for him in the end. Also would have been quite revolutionary, I think, to the medieval world.
But only something that will tell you the chances of precipitation, nothing else.
No, it's just that. But either way, that's a really amazing story, and it's the two stories have very nice kind of parallel structures of two people who very ambitiously set out on a goal. You know, it's like you were talking about, he'd spend long amounts of time on his boat. He was clearly very dedicated to this task. It wasn't something that he was doing for some ulterior motive. It was just his central drive to do what he did. It's it's nice that it's both stories are of people who threw everything else to the wind to go do the one thing they really wanted to do, and one of them turned out really badly in ways that could not have been predicted, and one of them turned out really well in ways that could not have been predicted.
And I think we can really tell on both of these stories are stories of privilege, right? Of what big money and expenses can get you.
Yeah.
And if you don't have to worry about anything else, sure, you might go on a crusade. Sure, you might spend your whole life on the sea. You know, you had nothing else to worry about. So these stories of seeing how one fortune is used and how the other fortune is used.
The very small list of people who got to play the medieval world in sandbox mode, you know?
Creative mode.
Yeah, in creative mode, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kurt, those are the two stories for the day. Let me give you a quick refresher of what you just listened to. So the first story was Richard the Lionheart's incredible, outrageous tax that led to the signing of the Magna Carta, a story of how someone's own caprice led to limiting of royal powers everywhere. The second story you just heard was how immigration due to persecution somehow led to one of the greatest discoveries or rediscoveries of the entire medieval world that to this day we can still feel the repercussions, and that is Jacob or Yaqub al-Maliya rediscovering the compass for the European world.
Yes.
What do you think, Kurt?
And then getting lost in the Mediterranean.
Well, you know.
Yeah, well,
Good
that's
story.
always going on. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, Kurt, it's now time to go to our least favorite part of the show, which is
Deliberation.
Wow. Let me start with the Magna Carta story. I really love, I already knew, obviously, a little bit of background information about the Magna Carta, but this is all, other than that it had some connection to the Bill of Rights, I did not know any of the background, but I really, really love that it's just like this intergenerational story of people who are just tithing and taxing left, right, front, and center just to blow it all. And of all the terrible things that could happen to you in medieval life, the thing that finally breaks down the monarchy enough to get them to concede rights is just like too much taxes. Of course.
too much
That's
taxing.
what it always is. People are like, oh, we're starving and dying and going to wars that are pointless. No, not that. Once the rich people start losing their money, then we'll have change.
And unfortunately, it's what's moved most of history throughout every written record we may have.
Yeah. But that is just amazing. And I also like that Richard the Lionhearted kind of gets his, I don't know if he gets his comeuppance, but I guess I'm glad that it didn't work out for him. I mean, seems like it's a story where you're not really rooting for him much of the way. He's really the only person rooting for himself. I guess his mom is like, at least don't have him be kidnapped. She's semi-rooting for him. Jury's out on her.
His mom was pretty good. Yeah, but I think she was just, I don't know if she was caring for him because of motherly worries or because she was caring for him because she was literally running the country while he was gone. So who knows?
She's like, if it's up to me, he could stay, but this is business. I mean,
right. Yeah.
But yeah, I really love that story. It's just a really fun story, honestly. Now, let me go on to the second story. And like I said, I really love that these stories are kind of parallel both in their narratives, but also in their time period and in their location. And both of them are about people who were moving around really their entire lives. And I don't know what you really would consider Jacob's home to be, but both of them spent long amounts of time away from home where they didn't have a stable home necessarily. Yeah. They both said, let's take this show on the road. We're one percenters.
I got a guitar strapped on my back and a dream.
And a boat / a crusade. What I will say about this story is the detail of the compass, the makeshift compass being used for fortune telling. I recognize this right away because probably a lot of other people who went through the American school system had to do this at some point in science class with like a sponge and a sewing needle. So I actually made like this little makeshift compass when I was in school. So
did you?
The one thing that I'm getting caught on is I feel really doubtful that somebody could have the knowledge of like put this together and it does something and not figure out that there's like a nautical application of it, especially since, as soon as Jacob sees it, he's like, oh, this is the thing. So other than that, I'm almost doubting that because there were so many details in that story. I'm like, man, the rest of it feels really real. So I don't want it to be selling it like I'm confident on this. It's just like, that's all I got at this point.
Hey, Kurt, we've hung on to less convincing pieces of evidence.
That's true. That's true.
To tell the stories apart.
So let me officially say, based on what I think somebody would do if they had a makeshift compass, the year Horton Hears a Who came out and the lyrics of the Northwest Passage, I think the story of Jacob, our international Mediterranean sailor and astrologist, is false. Or astronomist, astrologist, whatever. False either way.
Well, Kurt, you have chosen that the story of Yaqub al-Mariya, also known as Jacob of Norwich, is the fake story, while Richard the Lionheart spending so much money, just a ridiculous amount of money, on his crusade and his ransom money.
He's throwing marks.
You said that story is the false one. Well, Kurt, you guessed correctly. That story is indeed the false one.
Wow.
You're very correct. Now, you are going to be pretty disappointed at this, because it is indeed the false story. Jacob of Norwich never existed.
We should have mixed it. We should have said like Yaqub Norwich or Yaqub
Norwich.
Other words that I forgot.
That's what tripped you up, Kurt, for sure. But it is true that Richard the Lionheart kicked out all the Jewish people in his court during his coronation. It is true.
Yeah, if you notice in my deliberation, I never doubted that part.
Yeah, right. It is true that this started a rumor to the English people that led to a situation similar to the Rwandan genocide, where everyone said, oh, the king said to kill them all. Sure.
Wow.
So that did happen. And this was in 1189. So it's been going on for a while. Everything else, Kurt, however, has been invented. The only other thing, detail that was not invented is that the Chinese did indeed only use this for fortune telling. And it wasn't used in sailing until it was introduced to the Islamic and European world.
Wow.
The one detail you decided to hang on to was indeed a correct one, even though you said it was fake, which again is something we've done in the past.
Yeah,
so
I feel for you. That was what a lucky reference that I put the Horton Hears a Who thing in there.
Seriously.
Yeah, so I feel for you, Luis. That's tough, but
yeah, it feels rough. But you're right. It is a fake story. I think it's a little too good to be true that he died disappearing in the ocean. But I like that ending, so screw it.
I think you enjoyed a little too much me before just killing characters with tuberculosis before the story seems like it's over.
Yeah.
The sudden death, it's very nice. It feels really real, right? Where you're just like, oh, and then
it really does.
Oops.
Nope, they're dead. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
But speaking of someone that just died suddenly, Richard the Lionheart. Everything you heard in that story is true. The Saladin tithe was a real thing. The ransom money was a real thing. He really bankrupted the entirety of England, and it is because of his younger brother King John's avarice and greed that the Magna Carta was signed, and also the French holdings of England were fully lost. Wow. So that is all true. And the final true fact of that, which I find really interesting, is that Saladin did die with 1 piece of gold and 40 pieces of silver to his name. Like, he was a very generous king.
Yeah, clearly.
It goes to show the difference of these two sides of the Crusades, of the difference of one king to another, right? You kind of see these, I guess you could say, I don't know if that's going to be controlled, but these more traditional Christian values in someone that people in this world would call the devil, like Saladin. And you see the English kings really beating on the poor and not caring what the outcome will be except for their own desires, their own passions.
This story, I think, is so appetizing to me to really love, because it seems like in this conflict, the character who was morally good in the end won, and the character who was morally bad in the end got ransomed and thrown around and died at 42, which nobody loves.
Seriously.
But at the same time, I feel like I know, what am I going to come out on the podcast as a Saladin stan, and then tomorrow somebody's be like, well, don't forget that he killed those 400 concubines who were all children too. I was like, I know there's going to be something else, but it's so rare on this podcast that we get a true story that is actually not like absolutely terrible all the way through. I really
Yeah.
want to just take the win and be like, for once, I'm very glad to find out the story is true, because it seems like the good guys actually kind of won a little bit in this case.
Yeah, and you know what? You do mention this about Saladin, but we'll probably talk
Oh, no, not the child concubines. Oh, no.
But we'll probably talk about Saladin some other time in this podcast. But if you do have some chance to do so, research Saladin, because he is worthy of being admired.
Yeah.
And he was admired by the rest of the European powers, even during the Crusades. So he is one of the figures of history that should be revered and should be looked at as a military strategist, as an upstanding man. Sure, Crusades killed a lot of people. We can't put that against him. But,
True.
you know, there's always nuance to all of this. So Saladin, generally, good guy. We love him. We stand.
Gold star. Gold sticker.
Have no choice but to stand.
Stand by default.
Yeah.
We stand by process of elimination.
By process of elimination, Saladin of the Islamic Caliphate is a good guy. Well, anyway, Kurt, that brings us to the end of the episode. And I believe that once again ties our score to 3-3.
That's right.
If I'm not wrong.
That's right.
We are once again tied in this battle of wits, in this battle of fibbing one another.
On we go.
That's just what it seems like it's going to be. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to this story. Did you get the story correct? Did you correctly guess that Richard the Lionheart was a terrible person and Saladin was a winner in our hearts? Let us know.
Was
We
a
are
winner.
on-
Asterisk may have done terrible things. We don't know. This podcast. Not
Maybe.
responsible for any injuries and corrections.
Yeah. Well, let us know what you thought. We are on our social media, on Instagram at UnbelievablePod. You can find us on Twitter at UnbelievablePC. And if you listen to this podcast, you can find it anywhere you find your podcast. Or if you don't want to find it, you can also not find it. We're also now on YouTube. So if you find us there, we'll be on there as well. Thank you so much for listening this episode. And we'll be catching you next time, hopefully.
And remember, check all your fortune-telling devices for possible nautical applications. You never know, okay?
Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.